Hello everyone, my name is Roberto Teekah, and today I will be analyzing a work of art by my colleague Atasha Bovell. The title of the work that we'll be analyzing is Breathing Here, and it was produced in 2021. The work measures 12 inches horizontally by 16 inches vertically, and it's a painting that's done using acrylic paint, but it also features synthetic hair, and this is all done on a canvas board. The paint, interestingly, is not only applied with a brush, but it's also applied with palette knives, and even the fingers are used in the painting process. Looking at the work, we can see several abstract forms. One that's notable is this large blue shape or form that exists in the upper half of the painting, and around it you can see these black contour lines. Springing out from this center point here are three curved lines that are slightly lighter blue, and apart from those, on the left hand side of this blue form, we can see another indication of lines here with those dark contour lines, and uh, one example of the color yellow, which is the only example of it in this entire work. Apart from that large overarching figure, down here in the lower right corner, we can see another form or shape. This one is done in white, again with those black contour lines. And this one we can interpret it to be a representation of the female genitalia. And around this object we can see those examples of synthetic hair, the pieces of synthetic hair that appear to be twisted or braided, and they radiate out from this center object. On the lower set of braids or pieces of hair, we can see red acrylic paint is applied to them and also onto the painting surface. In terms of the background, we can see there's no uh, clear idea of an environment or objects in the background. There's only an indication of what may be a horizon line, and that adds some depth to the work, but it's only an indication. In terms of color in the work, we can start to analyze those elements, those building block elements. And the first element I would analyze again is color. I would describe the work as being mostly monochromatic because even though there are those small areas of blue and red, the dominant color in the work is blue, this bluish green color. It's almost gray in some parts. And we know that blue comes with a lot of symbolism, like every color, but those symbolisms associated with blue can be ideas like peace, serenity, and even sorrow. And this specific shade of blue, when I was looking at it, I immediately was able to compare it to another artist who used a lot of blue in his work, or at least appeared in his work. That artist is Picasso. And if we look at some examples of work from Picasso's blue period, we can see that bluish green shade. It's very dull and it's not very saturated. And it creates this sorrowful mood. And if we analyze beyond the formal elements in these works and we know what was going on in Picasso's life, we know that he was around the time that he was painting these, he had lost one of his friends to suicide. And so he was dealing with ideas of death, and it was a very sorrowful time for him. And we can see that the work conveys that. And it's possible to make a link between Ms. Bovell's work and Picasso's work because you can see a lot of similarities there in terms of color and the emotion that's conveyed. Of course, we don't know that for sure. That's just an assumption based on similarities, but it shows that that color can convey so many ideas that we are reminded of something else. Now, apart from color, the application of paint is also something that can, can show the emotions that go into this work. And when you think of artists applying paint with tools besides brushes, I immediately think of the expressionists and the abstract expressionists, especially, who were not concerned with painting realistically. They were not concerned with painting pretty pictures. They were expressive. They wanted to get their ideas out. They wanted to convey emotions, raw emotions, using the bare bones elements of visual arts. And so they didn't need brushes to do that. They applied paint with their hands. They applied paint with sticks and tools. And that's something that Bovell also uses in this work. You can see, especially down here, it's pretty obvious where the palette knife was used to apply paint in a sort of impasto technique that leaves a texture in the work. And that again leads back to the link we made with Picasso's work, that this work is conveying strong emotions. It's associated with those strong emotions. It is dealing with powerful topics, and we don't know what those are yet, but we already can expect that in the future as we go further in the analysis of the work. In terms of the other elements that we can look at, besides color, we can look at the element line. Line is one of the most powerful elements in art. It's so simple, but it can say so much, and it can be used in so many different ways. Lines can be functional. For example, down here in this symbol here, the lines are used functionally. They're used to help us be able to identify what the object is. They tell us what the object is. Besides using lines functionally, we can use them symbolically. As a symbolic use of line, because just the movement of the line and the shape of the line can convey something. So you see these three repeating lines curve and aim towards this object down here, and they appear to be sharp and pointed, almost dagger-like. So that can be used symbolically. It can be saying something like, maybe this is a weapon, maybe this is some force, some negative force that's acting on this object down here. That's an assumption being made on what that line is saying, or what that line could be saying. Apart from functional lines and symbolic lines, another example of lines could be implied lines. And one example of implied line in this work is this overarching curve created by this blue form or object. And that overarching curve can be uh, interpreted in several ways. It can be seen as being suppressive. It can be, because it's arching over this object. It can be holding it down, holding it back. But it can also be seen as being protective, because again, it could be seen as shielding this object down here. We don't know for sure. It can be interpreted in several ways. Besides the use of lines, we can also look at the use of space in this work. The negative space that we spoke about earlier in the background of the work, where there's no clear identification of like an environment or objects in the background. It's just areas of color and this horizon line. So that it creates emptiness, this sort of cold, lonely environment. And that again can be compared to Picasso's work especially from the Blue period, because yeah, we can see the similarities in the background again. It's lonely, it's cold, it's empty. And of course, again, we don't know exactly what Bovell is conveying in his work at this point, but we can make links and we can compare and contrast it to other examples in art. Of course, we can't focus only on the use of the color blue, because there is an example of yellow here and a bold example of red here. So looking at the yellow, this bit of yellow that exists here, it's a very small amount. And if we look at the symbolism behind what yellow represents, we know that yellow is typically associated with joy and happiness, but it being in such a small amount compared to this large amount of blue, whatever the artist was using the color to represent, it might not be the symbolism that we're accustomed to. Whatever it is, it's clear that the blue is more dominant over this small area of yellow. If this yellow is being used to represent happiness, this painting does not have a lot of joy and happiness in it. It's a very small amount of that and a large amount of whatever emotion the blue may be conveying. Apart from those two colors, again, we have this bright saturated red that's used down here. And this red is paired with this pure white, and together these two create a very intense area down here. It's a focal point of the work. It draws the viewer in and it grabs the viewer's attention when looking at the work. Apart from those formal elements and looking and understanding those elements, another important thing to do when looking at an artist's work and trying to analyze it is to look at other examples of their work to see trends that may exist in their work. So, for example, symbolism or themes that are used often in their work. And looking at Bovell's work, we can find a lot of those recurring themes and examples of symbolism in her work. So, one example, again, we see it here and we can see it in other examples of her work, is the use of the female genitalia. That symbolism is used in a lot of her work. It is like a grounding point in her work where it's seen in a lot of the pieces, and from that the narrative is built around it almost. So this is one piece that's titled Dreadful Emotion, and here you can see the vagina is represented in red and white, and this one is also very expressive, just like breathing here is. And in another example titled A Bristle with a Purpose, again we see that symbolism here, that so it shows that recurring theme, that use of that theme and that subject matter over and over is a big part in her work. It's an important part in her work. In Breathing Here, back to the original painting that we're looking at, that here is an important part of the work. First, it's obviously in the title, Breathing Here. Here is an important part of it, but besides being in the title, it's literally in the painting. She chose to include physical here. Although it's synthetic, it's physically there in the work. And here is something that a lot of us, I think, can relate to in terms of expression. It's a big part of our identity. It's how many of us choose to express ourselves. And if you know the artist Pavel, you would know that her hair is a easy easy way to identify her. Her hair is very wild and full of life, and for her to use that in her work, it's very, you can see it's very personal to her, and it's a strong link to make between her and her work. And in her own words, she describes the hair in this piece as being hopeful. It shows hope. Hair grows through adversity. It rises like the sun and it shines through darkness. So you can see the use of hair is more than just taking some synthetic hair and gluing it to the canvas, but it's really a part of her as an artist. It's a part of her expression and her mode of expression then, both in her life and in her art. Now, we can make those links and we can come to those conclusions. We can research about the artist and we can research about other artists, but the judgment of what how successful the art is or so on is up to the person criticizing the work or the person analyzing the work. And I would say that in this work a lot is there's a lot to find in the work, but in the same breath you can say there's a lot that is hidden in the work, because without analyzing those formal elements and looking at the artist, we might not know a lot of these things. We might find um, the use of abstract elements. It might be hard to determine what these objects are or what these objects are saying. So it's important to analyze the work and to understand the artist in this process. And you can look at that sort of shrouding of symbolism as being a good thing or being a bad thing. because obviously the artist chose to represent these objects in this way. She chose to make it not obvious what these objects represent. She chose to give the viewer work then. So the viewer must do work to understand what it is representing, what is being represented in the work. So again, there's a lot of symbolism in the work that someone might not immediately be able to understand. But the artist is clearly dealing with topics that people tend to shy away from. So it's important and sort of touchy to explore these concepts of femininity and the female sexual parts, the reproductive parts, and to bring along all the positive and negatives that come with that. It's important to represent these things, and people often shy away from them. People start blushing, and people look away, and so on. But it's important to represent these things, and I think Bovell is using symbolism in a powerful way in her work. She uses metaphors, and she uses examples like in this piece, the use of deer is a strong example of symbolism and so on, and it's successful. She does it successfully, especially in this piece, because it conveys what she wanted to convey. It might not be a very obvious representation of things, but upon closer inspection and thinking more about the art, we can understand a lot about the art, about the artist. And it's an important way to approach art, not to just judge it based on what it looks like alone, but to think deeper than that. And I think it's important in not only Bovell's work, but all artwork, especially work that is not traditional in that traditional sense of representation. It's important to look beyond the surface and to see art for more than what is on the surface. We should dig deeper, and I think that's something that I would definitely take away from this experience. You have to be willing to look at the work and to understand it holistically, look at everything that is a part of the work and to appreciate it for that. So with that I've come to the end of my analysis of this work of art. I thank you for listening, and I hope that you can take away something from this analysis, and that it allows you to view art in a different way.